Good morning, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you've made the connection and are with us today. I'm Lori Fitz, your host, and the goal of our show is to explore a wide range of topics that challenge us to see ourselves, our community, and the world around us in ways that get us connected, and perhaps inspired or challenged to do just a bit more because we've made that connection. Our guest for the last couple shows has been Rick Bernardo. And Rick is an interesting guy that has so many valuable experiences that make it wonderful to have him on my radio show. He is an actor, a comedian, a musician. And for over 13 years, Rick taught organizational leadership, business ethics, and cyber tech ethics at St. Mary's University of Minnesota. And he also does all kinds of wonderful communications work and multimedia educational programs on communications, ethics, and well-being. And in the last two shows, we've explored all the crises that our world face, ranging from our climate being endangered, our COVID coming out of it, how are we coping with that, and coping with a war in Ukraine. And so often when we're faced with so much disaster and crisis, the tendency is to isolate and pull back. And our shows have been encouraging how to reach out and connect and how to make a difference. And how do we do that? And ethics, as Rick has brought that to us, is a model to think about in terms of how do we do that? How do we make decisions? In one of the shows, we talked about one way of doing that is taking care of ourselves and focusing on well-being and focusing on what are some of those paths to invest in ourselves and take care of ourselves so that we can reach out to others. And we discussed art. And so I've asked Rick in this show to be my co-host. And Rick has some amazing friends. And he has brought Ann Sawyer to our radio show today, and I'm going to have Rick introduce Ann to us. And thank you, Rick, for joining me as a co-host today.
Thanks for having Ann and I both here this morning. Good morning. And one of the things that makes life worth living is the people we meet. It's very, very few things we can do of any significance in life without somebody else. Some other entity, even if it's just nature. It's we work with somebody else. And some years ago, I met Ann Sawyer working in the Heart of the Beast Theater. And to give an overview of Ann, she's worked as a puppeteer, a stilt walker, an arts educator, and she's done this for the past 20-odd years with many Twin Cities groups, including Chicks on Sticks in the Heart of the Beast Theater and Art Start. And in addition to scripts for puppetry and theater, Ann has written and illustrated 2 books for children, now Nala and the Pink Tiger, and Nala Goes to Mad Mouse City. And I think, Ann, the Pink Tiger was also a show you were doing in the Heart of the Beast. That's when I first heard or saw Nala. And in 2020, Ann flirted with the podcast form for a while, creating A Woman with a Very Large Knife was the title of the podcast. And she's also published a picture book. Actually, I have a copy of that. A picture book for adults, teens, and tweens called Mars on Life. And she lives in Minneapolis with a conceptual pack of dogs. So that is all just such a tribute to not only Ann, but the arts in general and creative expression. And so, Ann, let's go back to, I can't remember when I first saw you, but it was hanging around in the Heart of the Beast Theater, which the building is an old, like, archival theater building. And I remember walking in there and seeing, like, as I went to my office, like a huge pile of swans for animization. Like, they kind of look like Lego characters that were going to hook together and fly off all at once any second. And as I walked by that up to my office, I thought, this is like a Disney World for adults or something. This is like every time I walked in, it was something like that. So it starts with where did you and I first talk? Was it there somewhere or around that?
So, yeah, I think we met at Heart of the Beast, probably when I was in the thick of doing the May Day parade.
Probably, that's right.
I was a staff artist for May Day parade for some years, yeah.
And a question I have about that, I mean, the puppets are amazing with Heart of the Beast. I mean, people think of puppets as being something that you have on your hand, a little hand puppet. These puppets are like 8 to 12 to 15 feet, and have a gargantuan presence that is magical. So, how did you first get into puppetry?
Oh, well, my short answer to that question is always I fell in with a bad crowd. But the longer answer is, gosh, from the time I was a little kid, I was always, my favorite thing to do was to play with the junk drawer. People would give me these beautiful things like dolls. And I would look at them and say, that's beautiful, that's nice, and I'd put them on a shelf. And then I'd gravitate back to the junk drawer and take things out of the drawer and set up little cities and tell myself little stories, to the point where I got teased quite a bit by my older brother for it. Although he was also gifted with he had a big imagination and did a lot of storytelling with us. But then when I was in high school, my friend Anya took me to a May Day parade, and I had never heard of Heart of the Beast, but and it was pouring rain, but this magical thing was coming down the street on these giant puppets, and I fell in love. And I remember thinking, I want to do that. And it was a long journey for me to get to that point. I did theater, and I went and studied languages in other countries and did a whole bunch of other things, but I ended up back in Minneapolis at a certain point, and I was on KFAI radio, actually, talking about a grant that I'd gotten from the Center for Arts Criticism about studying, comparing and contrasting Latino theater and what it was doing in Minnesota and what some people out in LA were doing. And a friend, Sherry Aronson, called in and said, I'm studying an aspect of Latino theater. Let's talk. And we met for coffee. And I said, writing about the arts is fine, but I really miss doing the arts because that's, I really miss that connection. And I want to do something that's hands-on and connecting with people. And I thought about Heart of the Beast, but I don't know. And she said, well, I know a couple of guys who are putting together a dinner puppet theater extravaganza, and interactive. And I said, well, that sounds deeply weird. And I'm in. How do I get into there? And so I went to an audition, and there was they said, well, our leading lady for this show called Madame Frou Frou's Cafe of Love is missing Madame Frou Frou. The leading lady went off actually to live in Paris. So they said,
which is what a Madame Frou Frou would do.
Exactly.
That's always happening.
Précisément. So they said, I said, I don't know anything about how to operate puppets. They said, no worries, we'll train you. And this, by the way, this company was called Galumph Theater, Galumph, which, the word Galumph comes from a Lewis Carroll poem, the Jabberwocky.
Jabberwocky.
Right, right.
Galumphing.
Galumphing.
Yes,
he came galumphing back.
Yes.
So they just they showed me the puppet and they described what she was like, this bon vivant who loved conversation. And they said, give us a voice. And the image that came to my head was Margaret Dumont from the Marx Brothers films.
Sure.
Groucho's straight man, the foil.
Yeah.
And so I just said, hello, welcome to Madame Frou Frou's Cafe of Love. And they just stared at me and they said, that's the exact same voice that the other lady did. And that's
So you were channeling.
I was channeling. I was pulling the archetype from thin air and saying,
and they knew that you were the one.
And that is what happened. I mean, from that point on, I was involved in Galumph, and people in Galumph, the puppetry circles all kind of overlap and connect with each other. And I got involved with Heart of the Beast and became a Mayday staff artist. And then I learned to stilt from my friend Amy Balstead, who was also at Heart of the Beast. And she started a group called Chicks on Sticks, which is an all-female stilt walking group. So,
Well, I love the fact that this all really dates back to a junk drawer.
it really does. It does. I was a storyteller and a person who liked to manipulate objects and make things and
see the possibility. I mean, to me, I understand liking a doll, but not necessarily, having that bond with it because it's done. The doll has all been created, but the junk drawer has all the possibility of what it could be.
Right.
And I love artists that take something and can see something beyond its function and create beautiful pieces.
And I gotta say, one of the things that deeply moved me about working with Anne in the Heart of the Beast is what unfolded for me was the depth of history for humans in the sense of, like, when you think of puppets, at that time I was thinking sock puppets and and I loved them, but I didn't realize it goes back to the beginnings of human history. How to pull this archetypal energy out of our world and become it for a while. The tribes would be the bison or be the deer and take on these roles, and that's all a form of what we now call puppetry, but I didn't realize it's an ancient principle of what we do.
Even the Punch and Judy, creating the political landscape of commenting and creating opinion and sharing that through art and metaphor. Punchinello not only had the Commedia dell'arte, but would pull out not only stock characters, but those stock characters would be sometimes, if you didn't have enough people, you had to have puppets
right.
to fill in the blank, if nothing else.
So there's that ritualistic purpose that Rick was talking about, and then what you're talking about, puppetry serving a purpose of being a relief valve in times of great turmoil. Punch and Judy shows were often, they were always popular and still remain popular in certain countries, UK.
Right.
But, in Puccinella in Italy, and the French version is Guignol. And during times where there's great upheaval, those puppeteers often were the first people to get chased off because they're the ones doing the political commentary that speaks directly to the common person. Now, of course, we have digital versions of that. But back then, that was one of the safety valves on society. They could laugh, and the policeman would get beat up and the crocodile would go in the sausage machine, and they were all.
And the clever servant was always able to figure out the way to make it all work.
Right. And that's another element of comedy where the people who are on the bottom are the smart ones who know what's going on. The servants, the women, and that allowed the servants and the women to laugh and have a safe space to let some of that rage out,
and perhaps even give them power. The sense that how they navigate may be making a difference in the long run. And that they do have power. They are not powerless. And so all of that, I think, is good ways of thinking about our own sense of power and how humor and how Rick has shared with us also in the past, how comedy can allow us to open up and see new ways of thinking and being, and how art also can envision possibilities.
All these forms of expression, they help us deeply connect. That's what's so great about them, all kinds of connections.
And with that, we're going to need to take a break because, of course, I've run over. I always run over. But we're going to learn from Anne about a very particular play that she created that helped her in her journey and others around her as well to look at a difficult time and make meaning out of it, just as we are right now in difficult times. How can we learn perhaps from Anne about her journey with art that will help us maybe open up to our own art within us? So stay with us. We'll be back in just a few minutes and learn more about children and optical illusions. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm Lori Fitz, your host, and I'm joined by Rick Bernardo as my co-host today. He's been in the last couple shows, so if you haven't had a chance to listen, go to my podcast, which is on am950radio.com, and you can just scroll down and you can see Connections little tile. Click on that, and you'll find our last few shows that Rick has been part of. Rick is a actor, comedian, musician, a intellect. Teaches ethics, has taught in the past at St. Mary's University, teaching business ethics and cyber ethics and all those good things, as well as he's been very involved with nonprofits and multimedia education. Just a great guy with lots of interesting background and has a passion for ethics and arts.
Thanks. And that's the important thing. A great guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are.
And modest. So,
and you embrace that greatness about you.
I have on my resume, I was actually voted most modest in my high school class, senior class. And I always was tempted to get up and say, no way, the best looking, most successful, come on. And then they took it away.
It's your chance, yeah.
So, and we're here with Ann Sawyer this morning, whom I met in the Heart of the Beast Theater some years ago, and she is an author, a stilt walker, an arts educator, a puppeteer, and a creative voice that manifests the best of art in a lot of different ways. And we were talking a little bit about how she got into puppetry before, and then we were talking about how different arts help us deeply connect with one another about issues far and wide. And I think you wanted to, both of us want to hear a little more about some examples of how that might work. Go ahead, Lori.
Especially the children and optical illusions. I'm deeply interested in how that got created and your journey with that piece.
Sure. So the play Children and Other Optical Illusions was something that I wrote in response to my journey towards trying to be a parent, trying to be a mother. This is some years ago. I was having repeated miscarriages, and it was a subject that I felt it was very difficult to address. So much of what I did was art that people perceive as being for children. And I felt, very isolated in the pain of experiencing that, and really decided that I was going to take on trying to address that in a play format. And because I am a puppeteer, I did have some puppets and multimedia in it, but I also had live performers, and a soundscape created by some really wonderful local musicians. And so
our culture isn't one that knows how to deal with miscarriage.
Right. We don't have any rituals around it.
There's no ritual, and there's, I think, one extreme to the other where it's, well, get over it sort of thing, and which is deeply painful.
Right. To
have anyone, diminish the grieving and the pain. Yeah. And on the other hand, just not really understanding and lost for words, so they don't say anything at all.
Right. And grief, whether it's losing someone that you knew and loved, or whether it's a more amorphous kind of thing where, you lose a child that actually never came, you never got to know that child. It's still, there's this amorphous piece of, what was that?
And you were connected.
Yeah.
You were connected to that.
You're connected, yeah.
And you lose that connection.
Yeah. And also I think that there was this sense, I think Western culture, we have this idea that we can control everything through science. And that's not the case. There's a lot that they really don't understand about how the miracle of birth happens, right, and why sometimes it doesn't take, and nobody could give us any answers. And I just really needed to grapple with that unknown. So I used the metaphor of physics and optical illusions to talk about that experience. And really what was healing for me about it was getting to work with the cast and hear their thoughts and perspectives, but also to share it with the audience and then have people come to me and say, I've been through this. I didn't know how to talk about it. Thank you for creating that space. So, and even
And in
now,
that-
years later, I have people come to me about that. Yeah.
And that in itself, because I think it is isolating.
Yeah, it's
To
really
not-
isolating.
To not have a culture that can, or a ritual that allows you to process it.
Yeah.
To be able to have an art that allows you to process it, whether you've created it or you participate in it, gives a freedom, a freedom that of things of whatever was blocked inside, allows it to have its own dimension.
Yeah. And it goes back to what we were talking about puppetry and how it's connected to ritual. And since our culture doesn't have ritual around miscarriage, this was my way, I guess, of intuitively trying to create something around that. And I'm not saying that I was healed, like I'm it's not something that I ever am done with, but it took me out of that space of loneliness, being able to out it. And then it gave permission for other people to talk about it.
And I'm not sure, this is my own just opinion, I don't think we ever heal from anything that's traumatic.
No.
It's just there. But I think it does allow us to connect with others who've had that same trauma in a way that allows us to feel good.
Right.
That allows us to say, okay, I can empathize and I do understand the pain. And that in itself is a connection that allows a type of healing, not a forgetting, not a diminishing of the pain, but the pain, perhaps we grow larger and the pain stays the same, but we grow larger and just are able to hold that pain differently.
Yeah, I agree.
And art can do that for us.
One thing that seems universal is there's an energy to everything, and one could consider that. And when we have a loss, and when a woman has a loss like that, the question always would seem to be, what does one do with that? And whether it's arts or ritual, which are very often the very same thing, those are languages that go deeper than words, and the words we have aren't even adequate for this sort of a loss. So we just really need to connect around channels for that energy to flow or to do something with it. It's not going to go away, but it has to move.
So
That energy is stuck inside you, then, it just goes, it comes out sideways. It comes out in ways that are not productive or good for anyone. People grow cancers, I think, from keeping stuck energy. I'm not saying that that's blaming cancer victims. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I think that your body holds trauma
and stress
and
the stress
and
impacts,
it will do things, and so
do things,
one way
yeah.
you can, and sometimes it will still do things no matter what you do, but I think that art can at least allow you a means of releasing some of that energy and turning it into something, spinning straw into gold, maybe.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the dimensional puppetry. How did you work that in ways that in this play? How did you represent? What were some of the ideas you went with?
There are a couple of wild and crazy things that we did. We had so one thing that I did is I had two couples, and one was a little puppet couple, and one was a live two flesh and blood people. And so the puppet couple, they were. I mean, I think that in a way people were able to connect with them because they were kind of small. They were tabletop puppets. And there's there's sort of dark humor. There's this one of the female puppet had a little balloon in her stomach, and it would inflate, and then it would deflate, and it would inflate and deflate. And it's sort of a terrible edge that I was playing with of like this humor, this like visual humor, but at the same time it's just really, really sad. And you can do things with puppets that you can't do with people.
Right.
And so I was pushing that envelope. Another thing was I had a giant head on a spinning wheel of fortune, and inside the head there were various items that were sort of symbolic. And there was a live feed camera over the head, and this surgeon was plucking things out of the head and they were like a strand of DNA, and stuff like that. And
All possibilities, but nothing.
possibilities,
yeah.
nothing
For sure.
and
So
nothing
that-
was certain, and we didn't know what some of these things meant. And so, just playing with the multimedia and puppetry aspect provided interesting visuals for one thing, but also allows you to come at some very mystifying things in a way that's, again, it's more intuitive than it is scientific.
And it sort of questions into our need for certainty,
Yeah, yeah.
which we've also talked about is how much certainty are there in decisions that we need to make. It allows there to be more room.
Yeah.
And with that, of course, again, I have gone over, and we are actually supposed to be in segment 3 at this point, but that's all right. We're out of room, but we'll make room because we're going to come back and we're going to hear about some art stuff that's coming up for you and how exciting that is. So stay with us. We will be back and we'll learn about arts in the schools and some creative things that are getting done there. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. And my co-host today is Rick Bernardo, who is a business ethicist. He has taught for 13 years at the St. Mary's University of Minnesota. He did that. And
That was me.
Yeah, it was you. And enjoyed doing that. He's also an actor, a comedian, a musician, and I'll say it again, an all-around great guy.
Uh-oh.
And I have invited Rick to be my co-host today, and he has graciously been encouraging folks to join us, and he has invited Ann Sawyer, and Ann has been sharing her journey with art.
Yeah.
And we were just talking at break, at looking at art and healing. Share your thoughts with us, Rick, on that.
Oh, arts and healing. Well, it is such a one thing in common with the field of ethics and any sort of art and any sort of human being. I would suggest is that there's always a desire for humans to be whole, or to feel whole. Sometimes we are, and a lot of spiritual traditions and wisdom say you're whole no matter what, but we don't feel that way. And individually or collectively sometimes. There's something missing that would make a difference, and we don't feel complete. The root word for healing is the same as for wholeness, which is the same root word for holiness. Mm-hmm. It has to do with integrity in the sense of being complete. So arts are such an amazing gift of connection in those veins.
And hope. I mean, it gives us maybe the process doesn't feel hopeful. It feels perhaps painful, but ultimately the process of art creates a sense of hope.
There's the words vision and voice come up in arts. If you have a vision and you have a voice for something, you can go somewhere with that, or you can have a sense of direction. And it's, if not immediate wholeness, there's a possibility for it, and that's what it's all about. If you have a sense of possibility, the word hope in a lot of coaching traditions is used as a wishful thinking. Mm-hmm. In these other traditions of arts and a lot of faith communities, hope is actually more like commitment. We're going to see this through. Mm-hmm. It's a different use of the word. So I was reflecting on what Ann was saying before, and there's personal tragedies, there's collective tragedies. We've got the war in Ukraine. The things like that are going on all the time around the world. In this country alone, we're close to 1 million people dead from the pandemic. And you don't hear about it a whole lot. Those people there's still millions of people suffering around that loss, mm-hmm. which 2 years ago we had a president saying there's 5 people, it'll be over in 2 weeks. That, I have nowhere to go with that energy, my disgust for that sort of ignorance and actually I would suggest willfulness around death in certain parts of the country. So there's something we're living with.
And the children impacted, not having the traditional schools.
Oh.
Right.
Not being isolated in their home, parents trying to figure out how to do education or not, and and children coping with that. I mean, I think of the children coping with COVID, but I also think of the children in the Ukraine, the refugees, that artists are working with them to create art for them to make sense. Some of it breaks my heart, some of the art that I see.
So there's examples. So we want to hear more from Anne about like how, with some examples in your work, can art heal around that and bring that sense of hope with a capital H.
Mm-hmm. Hope with a capital H. Well, I like what you said about hope in some traditions being about commitment, a commitment to continuing. In my mind, what came to the forefront was just continuing to show up even when things are really hard. So continuing to make art with whoever needs to make art. That's part of what I do is facilitating other people's creativity, and I see it every day in my work how a light can go on in someone when I teach them stilting, for example, and suddenly they have this superpower that they didn't know they could do. That they have this thing that they can do that they thought was impossible, or when I was teaching sewing, creative embroidery techniques at a women's halfway house, and this lady who had seemed kind of shut down at first, after the third session, she mastered the French knot, and she said, "I can't believe I'm doing this," and that was my reward for the day. So I think just there's so much, one of the things that I'm doing now is I've just written a grant and gotten it for the Arts Impact from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council to go and work in the schools to deal with mental health issues. And it's a creative writing program that I'm piloting. And we'll be at the Mississippi Creative Arts School and at Bancroft, which is in my neighborhood. And we'll be playing with some of that. Is it the image that comes first, or the word? And so we're going to be going back and forth between words and images to access some of the stuff that kids are thinking about, what makes them hopeful, what how they connect, what I don't know
what's stopping them.
What's stopping them?
What?
Yeah. Just sort of trying to tap into some of those deeper issues, but in a way that's playful and fun. I mean, the kids have had a really hard time of it.
Yeah.
They haven't gotten a lot of art during this time, I think.
And I think kids learn best through story and through play. Mm-hmm. And if kids are allowed to play and explore their feelings, I love creative drama.
So healthy.
Well,
it's so healthy.
We know that we all learn best through story. It's
Right.
sort of a revelation to some. Others of us in the arts have known. Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah, that's how we do move people. But understanding our own story, I think, is an important goal. Who really are we? And as you tease that out with helping them create their story, I think is important. Oh, yes. I know. Rick is being so good. He is reminding me that maybe this time I don't want to run over with time.
I raised one finger and it looked like a student at school, and I was just like, no, I just went 1 minute.
Yes,
so
we do, and I will honor it this time so that we have a full fourth segment. But I do think it's important that as we look not only to children, when did we lose that ability to play within our own self as adults? And, when did we stop telling our own story or figuring out our own story?
I think when people told adults at some point when they were children, they were told, "You're not doing that right. You're not doing that well, so stop." And Kurt Vonnegut says, make a piece of art every day, even if it's bad. It doesn't matter. The point is that you made it. Draw doodle, make a dance, sing in the shower.
Which is a perfect way to end this segment. And in
Yeah.
our next segment, we'll learn about a vision that you have for pollinators. And we'll learn what future things that you might be into as well. So I didn't go over too badly this time. So stay with us. We'll be right back and we'll learn more from Ann Sawyer about her vision for pollinators. Stay with us. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. And the show has gone so quickly, mostly because I've got wonderful people joining me today. I have Rick Bernardo, who is my co-host, and he is an ethicist, a musician, an artist, a comedian, and an interesting man who sees the connections and encourages us to make a difference.
Oh, thanks. And we have Ann Sawyer, who's an author, puppeteer, stilt walker, arts educator, and we met years ago through some of her artwork. And Lori, so we were going to follow up on
Pollinators.
Pollinators, which all of a sudden I'm thinking of honey and bees, but it's something like that. Go ahead. So, Ann, you're working on some projects that have to do with what we were just talking about, which is hope with a capital H, which is more like commitment to a future, some kind of possibility. And with that, there's images around seeds and planting seeds and so forth. So tell us a little more about what you're working on now.
Yeah, well, so I've written and illustrated 3 picture books, and as I was one day sitting around thinking about hope and thinking about actually pollinators, because every year I work with a group called Art Start, and we do residencies in the schools around pollinators, butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, and so forth. And I think that probably those things collided in my head, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to make a picture book about pollinators where kids learn a little bit about the science of pollination, but also I was thinking about the metaphor of people as pollinators. And then I thought, well, what are the different ways that human beings pollinate ideas? Elders as pollinators of wisdom, scientists as pollinators of discovery, artists as pollinators of beauty and creativity. So really I want to create a picture book around that, not just the science, but the social science, and with a message of hope. And so that's my current project that I'm hoping to make a reality. I haven't found the funding for it yet, so if anybody has an idea where somebody who wants to help me make that picture book happen, that would be great. We want to use it as a way to kick off our pollinator residencies every year at Art Start when we work in the schools, and we work in lots of different schools. So,
well, I love the idea of the image that came to me when you were talking about pollinators and scientists. I see scientists sort of landing on a huge flower. There's this huge flower of our
white
humanity. And bringing life to an idea.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting. It's kind of like on their shoes, right? The bee doesn't know that it's carrying pollen,
right?
But it does know in some way. There's an instinct to share. There's an instinct to figure out, and it could be a nice restaurant as a flower. I mean, taking in that nectar and enjoying life. I mean, I think sometimes science gets so serious, and we think that they're all in white lab coats and doing serious things. There is a playful aspect to science that's in not knowing and asking the question and wondering and can that happen through sharing and pollinating with each other? That this idea isn't complete until this idea comes, and it may be in a playful or an original or a soulful or a hopeful community that ideas get shared.
Right. Yeah.
I remember Einstein, one of the things he said is more important than logic and math in physics is imagination.
Right.
Oh, I was just like, whoa, dude. Yeah.
But I can see that because he also believed that math was essentially the blueprint of the universe. So he knew that it was important. It was through math that physics could even be, and that he could see that there was some way of, if we could discover the math, it would be revealed. But the only way to discover the math is through our imagination and allowing us to not get so stuck in one way of thinking.
Right. Yeah. You have to be able to imagine a better future for people. I think the only reason that we've had women get the vote, that the civil rights movements have gone forward, and it's always, 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back. Right. We're still fighting on all fronts.
Well, if
in lots
Martin
of
Luther
areas,
King looked around and saw what he saw, he would not have been able to say much about civil rights, but it was because he had a dream.
And
he had a
imagine
vision.
better
He could
future.
imagine
Right.
a world
Yeah.
that people were being judged by their character and not by the color of their skin.
And-
that was a vision.
And he could commit. He could use hope with the capital H to commit towards working for that future.
And I think artists allow us to know how to dream. And we may look at a painting and it resonates with us because it's a shared dream. It may be a shared nightmare that is looked at. But there is a resonance to seeing it and having it be expressed that allows us to feel, as you were saying, more whole and not
Right.
And we can do that with one another. So we're in a world where there could be a wildfire of connections, deep connections available like this. And so can you say something more about what sparks you to want to do something or to not do something? You probably have all kinds of ideas, but what's the thing that really says I have to share this?
Well, I mean, often it's when an idea comes to me fully formed. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's just an image. And I'll start with an image and start developing it. And for every thing that I make that gets completed, there are, of course, 4 or 5 things that don't, because things, sometimes just don't fully fledge. They
not
don't
all
come out.
pollen will
Right.
create the seed for
Right.
that flower,
Right.
and so the fully formed imagination is wonderful. But I love being able, and I know we have less than a minute, to encourage our audience to be thinking about what does inspire them. And everyone can be an artist. And if folks wanted to get a hold of you for whatever reason in your arts and teaching and whatnot, if you want to share a little bit about how to get connected to what you do, please share.
Sure. Yeah, I have a website, AnnSawyerArt.com. And it's just Ann with an E, A-N-N-E, Sawyer Art, all one word, .com. You can email me through that, and I can, talk to you about whatever you want to talk about.
And then, as Ann said, that is part of her journey, is helping us find our art. So thank you for doing that with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And have a great week.